The State of Crypto is presented by Tron, connecting the world to the power of cryptocurrency. All right, joining us now to discuss more is Consensys Senior Counsel and Director of Global Regulatory Matters, Bill Hughes. Bill, first want to get your reaction to what SEC Chair Gary Gensler told CoinDesk recently about the agency's rules for the crypto industry. And also, you wrote a recent opinion piece for CoinDesk titled Why U.S. Lawmakers Shouldn't Back Senator Warren's Latest Crypto Bill. We'll get into that afterward.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I watch this show a lot, so I'm a big fan. So it's great to be here.
Well, thank you.
I think fundamentally with the SEC, they have chosen a path to they pretty much decided what they want to do with the space, and they've chosen the path of enforcement to express that policy preference, as opposed to rulemaking, and that was obviously very deliberate. I think when you pursue a path through enforcement, all you have to find is the right case to make your policy point, and then hope the market listens to the point you're trying to get across. When you're rulemaking, not only do you have to take feedback, but when you finalize that rule, anybody affected can then challenge it. And so they don't want to take it from all sides. They know that they're pushing their statutory authority. So it's easier to go after targets where they have a good case and establish that as at least rhetorical precedent, not actual judicial precedent, and hope the market takes that and it affects the overall market activity. I, for one, am looking for, and we can talk about Kraken and the other cases if you'd like, but
I mean, can you spell out exactly what the policy is, or what the policy you think is that the SEC is trying to enforce with enforcement actions?
Sure. Essentially, it's crypto assets are investments, and every service attendant to it is is a financial or investment type service, and all of this stuff should fall under the SEC and then the fringe marginal cases probably fall under the commodities laws or whatever. But how exactly to establish this authority? They've certainly come to that conclusion. And they could just write a rule saying that that's how it is. They get to decide what securities are and what securities intermediation is, and all of this falls in that bucket. I mean, rhetorically, they've said that for months, if not years now. They just haven't done anything official to memorialize that. They just want everybody to take their off-the-cuff comments as written law. But we're starting to see that strategy play out in litigations. And my hope is that crypto, and my expectation is that there are certain offerings or services where there is conviction that it is not a securities offering. It is not securities intermediation, and they do not need to be registered under the securities laws. And that people are going to stick to their guns and actually take the issue to the final arbiter of legal issues, which is the judiciary. The SEC does not get to call its own shots. What they say does not go. They have their interpretation of the securities laws and their own authority. And that while that interpretation to some extent deserves some deference, it does not control what a federal judge does. And so I think the crypto ecosystem over the next 2 years, especially while Congress doesn't really do anything policy-wise in this space, If the SEC is going to ride with impunity on crypto and go into some services and into some offerings, which we firmly believe and on the merits believe are outside the securities laws, then people should stand up and fight for what they believe in.
What is the main benefit to the SEC by pursuing it this way rather than by issuing policy statements outright? Cooperating, as we just had our previous deputy managing editor for policy and regulation discuss, that instead they're rather than outright stating it, it's just enforcement action after enforcement action, lawsuit after lawsuit. Is it what is the benefit to the SEC to do it this way versus, just a simple policy statement or what have you?
Because the Administrative Procedures Act is a pain in the neck for agencies that are going to do rulemaking, especially rulemaking, which extends their regulatory perimeter to a place that Congress has not explicitly authorized, especially in today's judiciary with this Supreme Court. I think EPA, West Virginia versus EPA, is probably the most important administrative law decision coming out of the Supreme Court in decades. What it says is that the agency cannot, without a clear expression from Congress, do things which are outside of its original purview or outside of explicit grants of authority. When you bring an enforcement action, you are bringing one that you think you're very likely to win, and what you're offering for settlement is attractive enough generally to the target where they agree, and then you can show this to the market, and the market generally views that in most situations as a form of line drawing. It's a lot easier than administrative rulemaking. Administrative rulemaking is far more challengeable by many parties. It's incredibly complex. It's incredibly hard. When I was at the Department of Justice, there would be rules written for well over a year and redrafted because everybody could point out how, from a litigation perspective, the rule was at risk. And there's a lot of federal judges out there, and some of them very much don't like administrative overreach. And so, just like you saw under Obama and Trump, you would see a lot of these rules being challenged immediately once they went final. And to the extent that there are rules that will go final, you will undoubtedly see them challenged. And you'll get a sense then why it's easier to go after a case that you think is easy to win with a counterparty which you think is likely to settle.
Well, certainly the collapses of FTX, as well as other firms in the U.S., Voyager, Celsius, have emboldened regulators to do at least something about it and create the clear regulation and policy that many in the crypto industry have said is needed. Nevertheless, Senator Warren has created some crypto legislation that you disagree with. You wrote an op-ed for us about it. Tell us why.
So this bill, the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act, was initially introduced, co-sponsored by Senator Doc Marshall, a Republican from Kansas, last December. Congress turned over, and it needs to be reintroduced. She essentially informed the public at the hearing last week that she intends to reintroduce it this spring. The problems with the prior bill still remain. Essentially, what it does is it says U.S. software developers who develop crypto software and users in the U.S. of certain crypto software will be under FinCEN rules, because FinCEN will have to update its rules, whether they like to or not, and there's good reason to believe that they do not want to do this, that they would be classified as financial institutions. These developers and software users would be financial institutions under the Bank Secrecy Act, and that would require them to have anti-money laundering compliance programs. It would require them to KYC users. It would require them to monitor transactions and report suspicious activity to FinCEN, which is already drowning under data flooding in from traditional finance. Not only is it a massive recategorization of software development and software use in the United States with respect to crypto, it then requires the SEC, CFTC, and FinCEN, the Treasury branch, which does Bank Secrecy Act regulation and implementation, to now have a monitoring program that scrutinizes every registrant's compliance program. This is a massive bureaucratic undertaking. It is the mind reels at how expensive and how manpower intensive this would be, not to mention how burdensome this would be on regular financial institutions, money services businesses, and certainly crypto software developers in the United States and crypto software users like miners and validators in the United States. it would be utterly suffocating. Fundamentally, this is unconstitutional. It compels speech because it applies to even hobbyist developers, not just people running businesses. Businesses are regulated all the time, including their speech. However, just hobbyists are generally out of bounds. This bill purports to regulate anybody developing or anybody using the software. It's unconstitutional on the First Amendment, their Fourth Amendment arguments, and fundamentally, there's zero indication that this would have any practical effect on illicit finance. We all agree illicit finance, or at least I agree that illicit finance is something to be taken seriously. I don't engage in what about arguments about TradFi or that it's such a small percentage. I think it's a topic that we need to engage with forthrightly. But this does not work. There is nothing critical about the United States in terms of software development or software use to these global ecosystems. You want to stop illicit finance on blockchain? Telling everybody in the United States they have to line up and register with the federal government is not going to solve that problem. There are things that are practically useful, blockchain analytics, getting government and law enforcement more engaged with private sector, getting the private sector, especially exchanges, exchanging information about hacks and the like, and being more responsive to reports of that stuff. All of that stuff is not in this bill. And so I think it is remarkable that so-called limited government types on Capitol Hill are actually looking closely at this and considering sponsoring it, because this is the furthest thing from a limited government bill. And I think those folks looking to co-sponsor it really need to either reconsider their position on it, or they need to be forthright about what this bill is, and they need to face up to the type of regulatory regime that this bill would introduce.
Well, the consequences of the crypto crash we've seen in the last year certainly have, we're seeing the consequences right now.
This is the echo of FTX.
In policy making. Yeah,
this is the echo of FTX, and people want to do something.
All right.
Yeah.
Bill, we got to wrap it there, but thank you so much. Of course, you can read more from Bill's op-ed on CoinDesk.com. That was Consensys Senior Counsel and Director of Global Regulatory Matters, Bill Hughes.